setting up your meeting for Facebook Live. Once we go live, I have to go back to Zoom. Otherwise, I get an echo.
That's funny. It says on my thing, it says we're live.
Oh, okay. If we're live, everybody, hold on. Let me get all of our technical stuff out of the way. Yep, we are. Now I have to go back to Zoom. Hold on, everybody. I can get us there. Yay!
Yay!
I'm always so excited every time when it actually works. So everybody, you are in for a treat. This is my friend Denise Kiernan, and Denise is like a really nice person, but she's also like a journalist. She's not just a writer. I mean, Denise, we're going to be talking about a book, but Denise has reported for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Village Voice, for everybody. I bring you the best people. And she also was the head writer for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire during its first season. That's a great trivia question. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Susan. It's so great to see you. Thanks for having me.
I am so happy to have you. Denise is stationed in Asheville, North Carolina, but we met in Deadwood, South Dakota at the South Dakota Festival of Books.
What a place to meet, and what an evening it was.
Well, we were not actually in Deadwood when we had our meeting. It was a bit of a disorganized event. And when they handed out penis candies, I'm like, I don't know about this. That's where I met Denise.
No one told us ahead of time there were going to be penis pops. I would like to know that before I'm going in to do some sort of serious presentation, that this might be part of the evening. Be a good heads up to have.
What is really funny is I came into this event, I knew nothing. And I knew I was going to be doing the event, speaking with Denise and with Karen Abbott, who's a good friend, both of them serious writers, right? And so I'm not intimidated by them, but I'm intimidated by them a little bit. I'm giving them their space. They're over in the corner and they're looking really serious. And I'm kind of staying.
We couldn't get her computer thing to work.
I didn't know that.
I know.
I thought you just didn't want to talk to me. So anyway.
Penis pops. We just wanted to figure out why the computer, the slideshow wasn't working.
That was bad. That was bad. Anyway, this was a presentation done by our mutual friend, Karen Abbott. And it was a wonderful presentation. But that's the way we met. And then we were pals in Deadwood, which was that South Dakota Festival of Books was really fun. I really enjoyed it.
It was a blast. It was a blast. And what a fun way to meet somebody. I mean, like when that happened, the three of us just, you know, Abbott and I had known each other for a while, and we just said, oh my God, Susan, oh, we can't ever let go of Susan.
I fit in. So we are here to discuss We Gather Together, your new book. And let me just say going in that I think, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm looking for Christmas presents right now, holiday presents. And I think this would be a great gift book for anybody who's into American history. Oh. You know, I mean, there are other aspects to it in terms of the use of gratitude and all that, but I just think it would be a great gift book. So start off, I have read it, but tell us a little bit about it. I'm anxious to see how you present it.
Yes, it's funny because as a writer, I'm always curious about how other people who interview me present it, because you hear people talk about your work sometimes and you think, oh, wow, that's super interesting. What a great thing they figured out about what I was saying. I never thought of that. So I had long been interested in Sarah Josepha Hale, who is one of the main protagonists in this book. She was a widowed mother of 5, no formal schooling, you know, grew up in the early 19th century. And she went on to become one of the most influential editors of the 19th century. That alone to me was really interesting. She had a campaign that she took to, you know, several presidents, governors, heads of territories, ambassadors in other countries, that she wanted there to be one single day when everyone in America came together to give thanks. Because Thanksgiving was not a national holiday until until 1863. And so I knew about Hale's campaign to make this happen, but I don't write biographies. I write about history and I write about moments in history, but as a writer, I'm kind of more interested in the juxtaposition of events or the intersection of events and people, as opposed to just those people and those events in and of themselves. So I thought the intersection between Sarah Josepha Hale and Abraham Lincoln, who was the president who got on board with her idea to establish a National Day of Thanks, I thought that was really interesting. I thought the idea of a unifying holiday to bring people together to say thank you in the midst of the Civil War, when nobody, I mean, so much fighting, so much division. I thought that was interesting. But I still wasn't, I got these ideas a while ago, and I just still wasn't ready. Something was missing. And you know how when you're a writer, you got to know when it's time to go, because these
Right.
books are they're your children, really. I mean, they're in your life, and you want to be curious about them and enthusiastic about them. And then I started thinking about the gratitude piece and how ageless and timeless the idea of giving thanks and being grateful is, and how unifying a concept that has always been,
Mhm.
and how in the last decade or so, there's been a tremendous amount of research into the mental, physical, emotional benefits of having a gratitude practice. And so that became sort of the linchpin for me. And that's when I decided I want to write this book. I do want Hale and her campaign to create Thanksgiving to be a part of it, but I also want it to be a look back at how long giving thanks has been a part of the human experience, and how looking at giving thanks is an interesting lens through which to view American culture.
There were some surprises for me in this book. Of course, I knew the story of the Pilgrims and all that. That was semi. I mean, it was sort of fictional, and that we'd had colonies before that. But I still viewed the idea of Thanksgiving, and I apologize to all of our international people here, as an American thing.
Sure.
As you point out, I mean, this goes back to ancient times, festivals to celebrate thanks, right?
Absolutely. You have, harvest festivals and various rites going back to as long as humans have walked the earth. The actual word Thanksgiving goes back centuries and is visibly read in a variety of texts, including some of the oldest, versions of the Bible and the Quran and, the Torah. I mean, all these different religions talk about the concept and the word as translated Thanksgiving. The word Thanksgiving in English goes back centuries. The idea of setting aside days of Thanksgiving, whether they be secular, sort of designated by a head of state, or religious as designated by the head of, someone's religious community, that goes back quite a long time. And you start to look at all of these different instances, and even, during the colonies, one of the funniest things I remember, and I don't know why it struck me as funny, it just did, but I was looking at the diaries of John Adams. And, in one of his diary entries, he wrote, and this is before the existence of the United States, he wrote, "Thanksgiving proclaimed for the repeal of the Stamp Act." So these were the kinds of things that they would, proclaim Thanksgivings for. And that sort of conflated with, harvest festivals for, good crops, for, abundant rains, for all those sorts of things. So it really is interesting to see how what was sort of a global human imperative transformed into one of the most popular, holidays in this modern day country. Yeah.
The I'd like to ask, by the way, those of you who are watching this, I know we have a lot of Canadians, we have a lot of international people here. And at some point, after this is over or during or whatever, in the comment section, like Canadian friends, you have a Thanksgiving, your Thanksgiving is just a few weeks, I think, before ours. How did that come to be? Those of you in other countries, religious traditions, would you comment in our comment section a little bit about your Thanksgiving Thanksgiving tradition, because I think that's going to be really fun to look at and to see what people say.
I would love that. I would love that. And in fact, one of the, I've always loved Thanksgiving, and I've lived abroad several times. I've lived in France. I've lived in Italy twice. And at the beginning of the book, I talk about my experience having Thanksgiving in Italy.
Yeah.
And trying, and in Paris, actually, in Rome and in Paris, on different occasions, trying to make that happen, trying to find cranberries, trying to, my friend's oven in Paris wasn't big enough for a French turkey, which, believe me, is much smaller than what we get in the grocery stores here. And all of the sort of mishaps and joys that often go along with celebrate.
I remember that story about the oven, and I have seen European ovens, so I knew what you were talking about.
It was so funny because we were descended upon a friend in Paris, and we went out and about, and we had heard from some folks in the expat community that this was a good neighborhood for shopping for, American foods. And we found a turkey finally, with some feathers, but whatever, it was a turkey. And we thought, oh my God, look how small it is. And we get it back to my friend's apartment, and it will not fit in the oven. And we all know how long it takes to cook a turkey anyway, but cooking one when like the oven is ajar this much, it was just.
But it's, I think with Thanksgiving, so many of our traditions, the things we remember are the things that go wrong.
Yes.
And this year with our pandemic Thanksgiving is going to be interesting, which reminds me, I was really struck, and I texted you and asked you if you would read a couple of paragraphs. This really, really struck me. This is about what you write about the Thanksgiving of 1918 during the flu pandemic.
I do. And I want to point out, and this is something that I think not a lot of readers realize, is that when you conceive of a book and you pitch a book and you outline it and you write it and you revise it, and then it's going into the production process, all that stuff happens
way
before it ever hits the world. So I was just looking at interesting moments in Thanksgiving history, and I wrote about Thanksgiving during the Spanish flu before 2020 happened. And then, we're going through the revision and the production process. And I told my editor, I was like, you have got to let me just set the epilogue aside. Please let me
just tweak
talk about this, because, when you write a book, you never know what world it's going to land in. It's always going to be different than the world in which you wrote it. But oh my gosh, I had no idea how much the world was going to change. But I think you had said 196. Oh yes, okay. Eventually killing more than 50 million people throughout the world, quite possibly more. The influenza pandemic took the lives of 675,000 individuals in the United States alone. The so-called Spanish flu was an H1N1 virus that devastated the planet, snuffing out people from all walks of life, even the young and healthy. Its grasp reached all corners of the earth, even the Arctic, and the number of infections was estimated to be 1/3 of the world's population, nearly 500 million. The war had played a role in its spread as well, as did a reluctance to act early on in the epidemic. When censors decided to downplay the severity of the deadly illness in order to keep morale up during the war, the resulting failure to act more decisively and critically would prove deadly for millions. The flu mutated, shifting in order to survive, and created an even more deadly second wave, which hit the United States and other countries still months before the war's end. The deadliest month of the Spanish flu was October 1918. November's Thanksgiving would necessarily be very different, especially since the most effective way of preventing infections was isolation, quarantine, and a limit on public gatherings. I know. And so we're going back and we're editing this, and I'm reading this and I'm talking to my editor going, okay, this is so eerie and just, wow.
It's one of those moments, right? And, I think about this Thanksgiving, Bill and I made the really tough decision that we were not going to go to our oldest son's house, which isn't that far away, and be with our grandkids. It's just going to be the two of us old people, lonely and alone on Thanksgiving Day. But
Joe and I, Thanksgiving's a big deal in this house, and the Saturday, we usually have a bunch of people over on the day. It might be family, it might be friends, it might be folks who couldn't travel that year. But the Saturday after Thanksgiving, the whole weekend is like a blowout.
right.
And Saturday after, I have a giant leftover party because you always have so many leftovers. So I use my leftover turkey and make a white bean turkey chili. And I make my stuffing. I do muffins in muffin tins. So I make stuffing muffins. Oh, they're so delicious. And then they make great sliders. So the next day you cut the muffins in half and you make little turkey sliders. So we have people stop by with their kids whenever it's convenient. We get the tree, people hang an ornament on the tree. It's just lovely. And none of that is happening this year.
No. But, I think about gratitude, and I try to always keep gratitude in my mind, but I found it really important during the pandemic. I try to be conscious of gratitude every single day.
Yeah.
And the gratitude for me in what you're talking about is, even though you're going to miss all those connections, you have a time of rest, which you wouldn't normally have, right?
Absolutely. And, you talk about trying to hold on to this sense of gratitude during the pandemic. And one of the interesting things that I came across while I was working on the book, and that is in the book towards the end, is all of this really interesting research that's been done about gratitude and all the benefits, and that the ability to be grateful and, really embrace that sense of gratitude when it's hardest, when things are difficult, when things are not going great, has an incredibly good impact on your well-being. Mm-hmm. And I think this year is, a great year to test that out. And, you talk about having a moment of rest, and, me having all those people in and out of my house, and the meals, and then the party and the tree and folks coming over. There are always a lot of people I want to connect with, but it gets tricky because I'm hosting all these people who are coming to my house. So there is this sense, I think, and this opportunity really for this year to be a little quieter and a little more focused, and to really kind of get back to that essence of Thanksgiving, that real true heart of, I am just going to sit quietly and be thankful for the fact, those of us who can. I mean, honestly, if you have a roof over your head and food on your table and people who care for you and you care for them, man, you get the jackpot.
Yeah, that is so true. And the other thing
now
I think about is, all the wonderful Thanksgivings I've had. My sister usually comes in, and all these wonderful things. And I thought, this year, Susan, you're not going to, instead of dwelling on what you're missing, use this as a time to feel grateful for all of those wonderful memories, because not having that puts highlights on the times when you had that. But we have to talk about Sarah Josepha Hale.
Oh my gosh, yes we do.
I have to tell my story. So I get my copy of We Gather Together, and I start reading it, and I come across Sarah Hale. Well, my whole maternal side of the family are Quakers, and Quakers keep wonderful genealogies. So I can trace my family back to the 1500s in England, and the Quaker persecution of the Quakers, and the Quakers of their involvement with the abolitionist movement. And it's a rich, rich family history that I'm very proud of. And I always heard about because it is the Hale family. My grandmother was the Hale. So I'd always heard about Sarah Hale as a relative. And as I was writing, all the relatives would say, oh, you're following in Sarah Hale's tradition. And it just made me feel so good. And this is my copy of Godey's, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it is M. Hale, which is my great grandmother, Mary Margaret Hale. Anyway, so I start reading, and big spoiler, says that Sarah Hale is her married name. Yeah. She's from New England, which I did know. She's married to David Hale, so she's not a Hale at all. And she was an Episcopalian. I mean, so I pulled out my genealogy book, and you know what? There's absolutely no link between my family that I can find and David Hale, let alone Sarah Josepha Hale. So you just ruined that whole family legend for me.
But it's pretty amazing. I mean, I'm from Irish and Italian background, so I mean, I can't trace my family here back before the 20th century. So I think it's amazing that you can actually do that. That is so, I mean, as a history buff, that's so neat just to be able to do that.
It's really fun. At one point I started with the earliest Quaker relatives in Somerset, England in the 1800s on both my grandmother and grandfather's side. And I did a specific line right down to my grandchildren's name and gave it to them so they could actually trace every single relative all the way back.
I love it.
So that was cool. But I'm thinking about Sarah, who is not a relative of mine. She is.
But you are like her. I mean, you are still following in her footsteps, whether or not there was a blood relation.
She's a little more pious than I am, but it really struck me. She is a combination of Martha Stewart and Oprah. You see that again and again and again.
And a touch of, like, you know, Chrissy Teigen or Kim Kardashian, because she was such an influencer.
She was an influencer.
I mean, she was an influencer before that phrase existed. She was a tastemaker. She was all of these things. But what is so interesting to me, because like you were saying, like Martha, like how to host, recipes, like, you know, recipe books, and, you know, how to set a table and what to have on your menu, what to read, how to dress, how to exercise, all of these sorts of things. And
here,
I love those. In fact, I could actually text Joe. I have a bound copy of Godey's as well upstairs. Oh yes, I love the plates.
Yeah, the plates are all in here. Now, this copy is I think you told me that you had a bunch from 1863.
I do. I'm texting. I'm gonna get Joe to run downstairs.
Here's one of the examples of one of the. So, Denise, this one is 1863, the one from Mary Margaret Hale, and I'm thinking that because I think it's kind of interesting that we both have 1863s, and it must have been because this is in the middle of the Civil War and people saved those.
Yeah.
And the color plates that were in this have all been pulled out and framed, and they're in my guest bedroom upstairs.
I love it. I hear footsteps.
You got your
who's here.
Now, Godey's ladies book, while Denise is getting hers, Godey's was founded by Louis Godey, and Sarah was the editor. Sarah Hale was the editor of Godey's ladies book, and everybody read this because I mean, look, I've got some color.
One of the ones they would fold out.
Yep.
Yes.
My fold outs are
beautiful. And they would include songs and compositions that you could play on your piano.
But no politics.
It
was a politics-free zone. And I always say, my Facebook page is like that. It's politics-free.
So is mine.
But a lot of religious, it's definitely religious, and it's definitely Christian religion.
She was
beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, these were just, and she was opposed to these initially, you know, the fashion plates.
She wanted to make it more serious.
Yeah, she wanted it to be writing, and she was an advocate for education for young women.
Yep. But not women's suffrage. She did not she thought women should influence the men in their life. So
That's
she
right.
a feminist in many ways. I mean, she published women's work, but she did not like the word female.
She did not like that word at all. And in fact, those of you who are familiar with Vassar College and its long history, that was initially called Vassar Female College. And boy, did Sarah Josepha Hale have a few things to say about that. And if you go to Vassar today, you can actually see on one of its original buildings where they chipped the word female out.
Really?
Yes, and it says Vassar College, but there's a big missing space, and the word female was chipped out, and that's Sarah Josepha Hale. But to me, she's such an interesting. You talked about like she wasn't a suffragette. She was not in favor of slavery, but she wasn't an abolitionist. I mean, she was very particular about the way that she wanted to exact her influence. And, looking back at her from a 21st century perspective, there are people who say, well, she could have done more. She could have done this. She could have done that. And that's all true. And that's all a matter of opinion. But I think it's so interesting when we look back at people in history to not say like they were perfect or they were terrible. It's like they did the best they could.
And she also, just as with my Facebook page, if you start getting to politics, then you alienate, and we don't need more alienation in the world. So she gets into politics, and a lot of people are going to start canceling their subscriptions to Godey's.
And they actually, it was so interesting at that point in time. In this book, to me, was interesting as a journalist from a media history standpoint. This was a moment, mid 19th century, especially when the era of the professional writer started to take off, when writers could actually start to make money writing. A lot of magazines before then were handled by what they called scissor editors, people who would clip something they saw elsewhere and kind of curate it and then put that out in their own magazine. And Sarah Hale was we are going to have original pieces. We are going to have a lot of work from women, a lot of writers you haven't heard of yet, but they're going to be, quite well known. Like yes. So one of my favorite stories was she, they publish a review of this very young writer's work. They say that, it is a bit boyish and it needs, this, that, and the other in development, etc. But it shows real signs of genius. And it turned out that her daughter, David, attended West Point with this writer. And David writes his mother, Sarah Hale, and says, I shared what your magazine wrote with my classmate, Edgar Allan Poe. And Sarah Hale had a writer-editor relationship with Poe till the end of his life. And the first printing of the Cask of Amontillado was in Godey's. And, she published, Washington Irving and Nathaniel Hawthorne before they were, Washington Irving and Nathaniel Hawthorne, but also putting so much work of women out into the world, anthologies of poems, anthologies of novels, and just historic figures. I mean, she could have used her position to she was a writer. She could have used her position to just go, me, but she didn't. She was constantly kind of putting other people out there, promoting education, promoting charity. And, you think, gosh, people with that kind of platform, if everybody,
used it that way. Yeah, that's true. Well, one of the things that I think is going to be interesting to a lot of the readers on my page, because we have so many romance readers here. So I pulled this one out. I saw this right away. She was a big fan of Pilgrim's Progress and all of these heavy kind of works. But listen to this. She said, I'll tell you what the book is in a minute. Of all the books I saw, few were written by Americans and none by women. But here was a work, the most fascinating I have ever read, always, excepting Pilgrim's Progress, written by a woman, how happy it made me. And the book, some of you may already know, is Anne Radcliffe's book, The Mystery of Udolpho, which is one of our very earliest romances. It's a Gothic romance. And so Sarah was one of our very first romance readers.
She was, she was, and she was, I mean, again, I know I said this before, but I think it's important to say again, this was a woman with no formal schooling, and she was raised in a house by parents who encouraged reading and just absorbing books and the written word. And her older brother, who did have the benefit of
The education,
schooling,
yeah.
he would share with her when he went off to Dartmouth, when he came home, he would share what he learned. I mean, he was constantly, so she had her own books at home, and then she was kind of piggybacking on, her brother's education. But for her, and she read that Udolpho book at a young age, and it made such an impression on her. She just thought, oh my gosh, women do
If this woman can do it, if Anne Radcliffe can write, so can I.
Yep, women can do this.
One thing that really I thought about, I was getting tired of her after a while, and it was on her crusade to have Thanksgiving an official holiday. This starts early on with her, and it goes on and on. She is obsessive with this. Yeah, why? There were a lot of unofficial Thanksgivings, but she wanted that specific American holiday declared nationally, Thanksgiving. Why was she so obsessed with this?
Man, you talk about when you wish, because to me, one of the things I love about really good nonfiction history and also really good historical fiction is that it is total time travel. I mean, you are in another, it's like, it might as well be sci-fi. I mean, as writers, no matter what we do, such an important part of it is world building, being able to like create that world that your readers sink into. And if you do nonfiction like I do, you have to create that world from archives and old newspapers and photos and all that sort of stuff. But that world is so important. But the ability to like go back and sit somebody down and say, really, what's the deal? What was the deal with Thanksgiving with you? But as all I can do is make assumptions based on what she did write and her passion. And I would say that she was the daughter of a Revolutionary War veteran. Her father had been injured during the Revolutionary War. She was born, before Washington's inauguration. She had seen the birth of the country. She had lived through every president that had been. And she saw the Union coming apart. The Union she had grown up in, the Union her father had fought for, been injured fighting for. And I do think there was this idea that finding reasons to come together and finding things to hold in common was important to her. She wanted the Union to be preserved. And at the same time, she had a lot of nostalgic ideas about, Thanksgivings might change year to year. The day they celebrated it in Massachusetts would be different than in New York. And, it could be 2 or 3 a year or whatever. She still had nostalgic ideas about those events and, days when it got quiet and you said thank you and businesses were shut and you visited with friends that weekend and had big meals. So to me, those ideas, the idea of a day to give thanks and the idea of the Union finding a way to come together and have something of import in common, to me, those two things sort of combined for her. And she thought, well, we only have, and she would always say, we only have 2 holidays. We have Washington's birthday and we have Independence Day. What we need at least, what's wrong with another, national holiday? And it should be this one. And everybody should say thank you at the same time, on the same day, throughout the states, the territories, the Americans living abroad, all of that. So, I mean, it is fascinating her tenacity with wanting to make this happen, because she was doing so much other stuff, and she wasn't some sort of privilege. I'm editing this magazine because it's fun. She needed to support
she needed
her
the money.
family.
She did. And
yeah,
another
and
aspect I wonder about that, though, is she's obviously a religious woman. She was a practicing Episcopalian.
sure.
She had
Mhm.
lost children.
Mm.
And I wonder if she was one of those people who tends to see the glass as half full, and where, even though there would have been no word for it at the time, where to keep herself from falling into depression over these losses, her husband, her children, that she was somebody who did try to focus on gratitude. And that may have been a factor why she thought this was so important too.
I think you're absolutely right, because I would look at, I mean, she's such a great example in that sense. Her I'm not going to give up attitude, because there were years when, she would write to people about having this unifying holiday and either be completely ignored or, yeah, no, not this year, we're going to do our own thing or whatever. But she would always, and you could see this in the writing in the magazine, she would always focus on who did get on board.
Right.
And who did celebrate and how they celebrated and how great it was. And, she lost both her parents, a sister and a brother, then lost her husband very early on in their marriage. And she has 5 kids. She loses a daughter, she loses a son. I mean, this is not somebody who led some sort of, hey, ain't life great sort of existence. And she still managed to find a way, even when people were refusing what she wanted, to say, yeah, but look over here. These people think it's a good idea. Isn't this great? Look at what they're doing. They came together and did X, Y, and Z in this territory, or, Ohio is on board and they really want this to be, a national holiday. And her tenacity and her kind of dedication to this ideal, and it's a lovely one, I think, just say thanks. Be grateful. It's very simple, and but it wasn't simple for her to pull off, and she certainly wasn't someone who led a life without difficulty, loss, and extreme trials.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, we're running out of our time here, and before we sign off, I just want to make sure everybody knows the book is called We Gather Together by Denise Kiernan. I think it's a great, well, obviously it's a great Thanksgiving book. I think it's a great gift book too. And it's just going to add an extra dimension, I know, for me, for the solitary Thanksgiving Mr. Bill and I have. So we're going to make it a time of gratitude. And I hope you get some peace and have a time for Thanksgiving in a new way too.
Yes. Get down to the core, get down to the basics. I've actually put a page up on my website called Zoomsgiving, which has information. It has gratitude, little gratitude quotes, and it has conversation starters, and it has Zoom backgrounds you can use on the day.
Is this on your website, Denise?
It's on my website, DeniseKiernan.com. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to link to that in comments, and I'm going to use it because I declared with our family that we were having a Zoom giving too. So we've got our time set up, and I was just thinking about how to structure that a little bit so everybody's not just talking over each other. So I'm going to take a look at that. So everybody, happy Thanksgiving. Hope you can look for the gratitude. And Denise, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm grateful to have you as a friend in my life.
Same goes for you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.